The cold metal restraints dug into Sarah Connor's wrists, glowing with a faint blue hum of alien energy. She flexed her fingers, testing the limits. No give. Not that she expected any. The Jakar weren't sloppy, just arrogant. Across from her, Commander Zarn Dravik observed with the detached curiosity of a predator studying a wounded animal. He leaned forward, his scaled fingers steepled beneath his heavy jaw. His dark reptilian eyes held no emotion, only the certainty of an inevitable victory. "You are wasting your time," Sarah said, her voice even. Dravik's nostrils flared, his forked tongue flicking briefly. "On the contrary, Major Connors. We are merely getting started." The interrogation chamber was designed to break minds. Sterile, devoid of anything human, its walls pulsed faintly with embedded neural disruptors, sending subliminal pulses meant to disorient. The air smelled like scorched metal and something faintly acidic, an odor Sarah had learned to associate with pain. She wasn't new to this game. The Jakar had no imagination when it came to extracting information. Pain, deprivation, psychological pressure, same playbook, different species. Dravik gestured, and a technician activated the neural probe. A shimmering arc of energy lanced through Sarah's skull. White-hot needles drove into her mind, unbidden memories flickering like an old film reel. Boot camp, her mother's voice, the sound of gunfire in the Martian colonies. They pulled at her thoughts like scavengers tearing flesh. Sarah exhaled through her nose. Controlled. Measured. "You are resilient," Dravik admitted. "Impressive." He tilted his head. "But you are still human. And humans are fragile." Sarah smirked. "Funny, I was about to say the same about you." Dravik's eyes narrowed. He turned toward his technician. "Increase amplitude." A fresh wave of pain tore through her skull. It was different this time. Sharper, more refined. They weren't just skimming her memories now, they were trying to rewrite them. False images flashed, her giving up coordinates, betraying her people. A crude attempt. Sarah focused. The human mind wasn't just a collection of data points to be extracted like files in a computer. It was fluid, unpredictable. And above all, it adapted. She forced herself to laugh. A dry, amused chuckle. Dravik paused. "You find this amusing?" Sarah leaned forward as much as her restraints allowed. "I find it pathetic. You're fumbling in the dark, trying to pick apart something you don't understand. That's why you'll fail." Dravik's jaw clenched. He gestured sharply, and the neural probe disengaged with an electric snap. The technician hesitated. "Commander, Leave us," Dravik ordered. The others filed out, the door sealing behind them. Silence. Dravik regarded her carefully. "Your kind has a peculiar resistance. But everything breaks, Major." Sarah exhaled, shaking off the residual static in her brain. "See, that's where you're wrong." She tilted her head. "Your mistake isn't thinking I'll break. It's assuming you won't." Dravik scoffed. "You are bound. Helpless. Tell me, how exactly do you intend to turn the tables?" Sarah smiled. Slow. Measured. The kind of smile that made people uneasy. "You're about to find out." Sarah awoke strapped to a different chair. The restraints here weren't just physical. Thin metal tendrils snaked from the cuffs into her nerves, a dull ache radiating up her arms. The room was warmer, the lighting soft, almost comforting. A trick. The floor shimmered like water. Patterns danced across the walls. She knew what was coming before Dravik entered. His voice echoed without direction. "We will bypass your stubbornness, Major. You won't even know you're giving us what we need." She closed her eyes for 1 second. Just long enough to center herself. When they opened, the room had changed. She stood in her childhood home. The scent of rain on concrete, her mother humming in the kitchen. Her old dog trotting down the hallway. "Clever," she muttered. Her mother turned, smiling. "You've been gone so long, sweetheart." Sarah folded her arms. "You're not her." The kitchen shimmered, flickering like bad holography. Dravik's voice returned, silkier now. "The subconscious is easier to mine when it feels safe." She sat on the couch, stretching out. "Tell me, Commander, did they train you for this, or do you just wing it? No answer. The house dissolved into a battlefield. Martian dust storms roared around her. Artillery fire shook the ground. She could almost feel the grit in her teeth. A voice beside her, Lieutenant Markson, her old squadmate, dead for years. You left me behind, Sarah. She turned to face the phantom. I did what I had to. You could have saved us. Sarah exhaled. I still hear you in my dreams. But you're not him. Markson vanished. The scene twisted again. Now she sat across from Dravik at a table, a chessboard between them. The pieces moved on their own, sliding and clacking without touch. Dravik leaned forward. You know, Major, this is not an adversarial process. Help us, and it ends. She picked up a knight and crushed it in her hand. It turned to ash. You have no idea how stubborn humans can be. His eyes darkened. The chessboard disintegrated. The room warped into a sterile lab, glowing with alien machinery. She lay strapped on a slab as mechanical arms hovered, buzzing. A drill descended toward her forehead. Panic clawed at the edges of her mind. Exactly what they wanted. She forced herself to breathe. Steady. This fear response is interesting, Dravik's voice mused. A protective mechanism. But it makes your neural patterns predictable. The drill stopped inches from her skin. Sarah smiled. Just a flicker. Predictability isn't our strong suit. A ripple passed through the simulation. Cracks formed in the sterile walls. Dravik's control was slipping. She pressed gently against the fracture in the illusion. You're trying too hard, Commander. The environment twisted one more time. Now a command center, screen showing Earth's defense grids. Her fingers danced across the console. Red warning lights flared. This is what you fear, Dravik said softly. Sarah turned. You're wrong. She tapped the console. The screens shattered into static. What I fear is you walking away thinking you understand us. A sudden surge of static shook the illusion. She felt it, a tiny pulse. Feedback. Not part of their design. Her mind reached for it instinctively. She brushed up against the code running the simulation. It wasn't just a closed loop, it was a living system, responding to her mental signals. She grinned. Dravik's voice wavered. What are you doing? Learning, she said simply. The walls pulsed. Control systems trembled at the edges of her consciousness. She felt nodes, pathways, connection points. Clumsy, rigid, all brute force and no subtlety. She could work with that. The simulation shattered entirely. She found herself back in the real interrogation chamber. Dravik stood behind a translucent panel, eyes wide. He pressed a control pad frantically. Nothing happened. Sarah tilted her head. Problem. The door behind him slid open. Another Jakar officer entered. Commander, you're destabilizing the entire array. Her mental patterns are contaminating the system, Dravik growled. Sarah chuckled. Contaminating? That's a nice word for beating you at your own game. Dravik glared. Disconnect her. No. They tried. The techs pulled cables, deactivated arrays. But the feedback loop was already active. She wasn't just inside the system was inside her. You never asked why humans survive impossible odds, she said quietly. It's because we adapt faster than anyone expects. Alarms blared. Systems flickered. Dravik slammed his fist into the console. Lock down everything. The last thing Sarah saw before the room powered down was Dravik's face, not angry anymore. Just afraid. The chamber flickered. Light sputtered, panels cracked with static, and the smooth hum of Jakar technology became a jagged mess of alarms and glitches. Sarah felt the tremors in the floor, but more importantly, she felt the tremors in their systems. The feedback loop was alive. She sat still, wrists still bound by restraints that now pulsed unevenly. Their neural interface couldn't distinguish between her mind and its control signals anymore. Every security measure they triggered to isolate her only gave her more pathways to explore. Dravik's voice echoed from beyond the observation wall. His tone had shifted from measured superiority to something tight and clipped. Stabilize the array. Purge her neural imprint from the system. Panic. Sarah smiled faintly. "Major Connors," came Dravik's voice again, more composed but strained. "Disengage from the interface. You are damaging yourself." She closed her eyes for a second, sifting through currents of raw data. Their system architecture was primitive in its rigidity, like a maze that never anticipated the mouse might learn to dig tunnels. She wasn't damaging herself. She was rewriting the rules. A sharp pulse jolted her. One of the Jacquard technicians was trying to sever the connection by force. It stung, but the attempt gave her another point of entry, right into their surveillance arrays. Suddenly, she saw what they saw: security camera feeds, patrol movements, weapon lockers. Perfect. She opened her eyes, looked straight into the observation panel. "Commander," she said calmly, "I'd start worrying about containment if I were you." His silence confirmed it. He was already worried. The room's restraints hissed as they unlocked automatically. Sarah hadn't consciously ordered it. The system had started anticipating her intent. She stood slowly, the cuffs clattering to the floor. Her legs ached, but adrenaline cleared the fog. Klaxons wailed across the station. In the corridor outside, armored Jacquard guards scrambled, weapons drawn, no longer confident. They hadn't prepared for an enemy who could fight from inside their own tech. She moved toward the chamber door. It slid open without hesitation. A lone guard raised his plasma rifle, but the targeting reticle on his HUD scrambled. The weapon's safety re-engaged without command. Confused, he hesitated. Sarah didn't. A swift kick dropped him cold. She took his sidearm and the key module from his belt. The corridor map flickered onto the visor. 3 decks up, command center. But she wasn't heading there yet. First, the data core. She turned left, walking briskly but without panic. Security fields crackled around her, but each one dimmed before she reached it. Doors recognized her as an authorized user. Every step confirmed her growing control. The Dominion had designed the system to dominate weaker minds. They had never considered resilience a threat. At the data vault door, 2 more guards waited. She didn't bother with stealth. The lights in the corridor flickered violently. Both guards looked up, distracted. Their weapons powered down involuntarily. Sarah shot one in the leg. The other fled without even raising his rifle. She keyed into the vault. The door rumbled open, revealing crystalline data cores pulsing with stored intelligence. "All right," she murmured. "Let's see what you've been hiding." She interfaced the stolen module with the vault's controls. Streams of information cascaded through her visor: fleet movements, attack plans, infiltration reports on human colonies. She locked onto the most critical nodes, copied the files, and simultaneously initiated corruption protocols. The data began to unravel. The console spat sparks as the system fought her tampering. She winced at the heat rising from the interface, but the feedback loop held. She was part of it now. A heavy metallic thud echoed behind her. Dravik. He stood in the doorway, flanked by guards who looked far less confident than he did. His face, however, was carefully composed. "Impressive," he said softly. Sarah disconnected the module and slipped it into a belt pouch. "I'd say the same, but honestly, your security is embarrassing." He took one step forward. "You're outnumbered. Surrender, and I'll spare your life." She glanced at the guards. Their weapons jittered in their hands as if they didn't trust them to fire straight. "Let's test that," she said. The room's gravity surged. She tapped into the environmental controls. The guards staggered under sudden weight. Sarah lunged forward, using the artificial drag to drop low, sweep Dravik's legs out from under him, and drive an elbow into his throat before he could recover. One guard tried to react, but his plasma rifle overloaded and exploded in his grip, sending him sprawling. Dravik gasped, clawing at his neck. Sarah pressed the sidearm's muzzle against his temple. "You wanted to understand humanity," she whispered. "Here it is. We don't quit. We don't kneel. And we learn fast." She slammed the pistols but into his skull. He went limp. Sarah turned to the last guard, who had dropped his weapon entirely. She pointed at the unconscious commander. "Pick him up. Run." The guard didn't need convincing. Sarah pulled a plasma grenade from the vault's emergency panel and set it for a slow burn. As the guard dragged Dravik away, She placed the grenade on the core's main conduit. The hum of energy rose. Time to leave. The data vault door sealed behind her with a heavy clang. Moments later, a low hum rose in pitch, building to an unstable whine. Sarah didn't look back. The plasma charge would detonate soon, and when it did, every scrap of stolen intelligence would become molten slag. Her boots pounded down the corridor, steps synchronized with the rising tension in her chest. But not fear, focus. Sirens wailed in different frequencies now. Red lights mixed with flickers of blue and amber. The station was confused. Systems meant to respond with order were collapsing into chaos. She had done that. As she ran, she opened the control pathways again with just a thought. Her mind reached into the infrastructure, bending the station's responses. Hallways sealed behind her. Blast doors rerouted personnel. She wasn't just escaping, she was writing the escape route as she went. Her visor pinged. A transport hangar, 2 levels down. One shuttle prepped for departure. She could make it. A voice crackled through the intercom. Dravik. Hoarse, breathless, but conscious. You think this ends with you running, human? You have infected our systems, but you cannot outrun us. She skidded to a stop at a junction and keyed into the security cams. Guards converged on the hangar, but they weren't coordinated. Their targeting systems glitched. Door locks confused friend and foe. You're right, she whispered under her breath. I'm not running. She rerouted power from secondary life support to the hangar's mag clamps, forcing all ships to remain locked to the deck except one. The shuttle she picked flickered green. A squad rounded the corner ahead. They opened fire, plasma bolts ripping through the corridor. She dove behind a bulkhead. Metal hissed and burned. Suppressive fire, one of the Jacquard ordered. Sarah pulled the sidearm she'd taken and peered around the corner. 2 guards. Center mass, no hesitation. She dropped them before the third could react. The last one hesitated a fraction too long. She was already on him, driving her elbow into his throat and disarming him with a clean twist. He fell, gasping for breath, clutching his chest. She kept moving. The hangar doors loomed ahead. Sealed. A momentary pause, fingers working the console. She felt the resistance in the system. They were fighting her now, closing doors, isolating circuits. Not good enough, she muttered. She punched through the firewall with another mental surge, fingers flying across the interface. The hangar doors cracked open, just enough for her to slide through. Inside, the shuttle gleamed under harsh lights, its engines humming, ready. But between her and freedom stood 6 Jacquard soldiers, rifles leveled. "Drop your weapon," one barked. She considered the odds. Not great, but not impossible. She raised the pistol slowly, then hurled it at the closest soldier's head. Before they could react, she triggered the gravity plating beneath them. Their knees buckled as artificial weight slammed them down. She sprinted forward, using their momentary confusion. Her fist connected with one's jaw, another went down with a knee to the gut. The remaining soldiers fired wildly, but she'd already slid across the deck, rolled, and seized a discarded rifle. She fired in controlled bursts, 1, 2, 3, dropping the last 2 before they could recover. Alarms shrieked louder. She could feel the station system seizing, fighting her every input. The feedback loop was burning out. She dashed up the shuttle ramp and sealed the hatch. The console was alien, but she'd already memorized its layout from the data stream. Fingers danced across controls, engines roaring to life. A tremor shook the station. The data core must have detonated. Perfect timing. Dravik's voice crackled through the shuttle comms, strained but venomous. "You won't make it out alive." She keyed the comm. "You've already lost." The mag clamps released. The shuttle lurched upward, engines screaming. She angled hard, banking toward the docking tunnel. It was partially sealed. No time to cut through. "Hold together," she muttered and punched the throttle. The shuttle slammed through the half-closed gate, metal screeching against metal. Hull plating peeled but held. She was free. The starfield expanded before her, cold and infinite. But her work wasn't done yet. The shuttle's NAV system struggled to lock onto human channels. Jacquard jamming signals still pulsed through the void. She rerouted power to communications, amplifying the signal. "Come on," she breathed. Finally, a flicker. "UNN Relay Station 14, this is Major Sarah Connors, transmitting on emergency band. Confirm reception. Static. Then, Relay 14 reading you, Major Connors. Signal weak. Are you secure?" She exhaled slowly. Relief threatened to crack her composure, but she held firm. "Negative. Pursuit likely. Uploading hostile fleet data and infiltration protocols. Mark as priority intelligence. Acknowledged. Data stream received." The console chimed. "Transfer complete." "You're not alone out there, Major," the operator added. "We've got search and rescue already mobilizing." "I'll be clear by the time they get here," she said quietly. She cut the comm and set course away from the Jacquard battle lines. Engines at full burn, shields still flickering, but holding. In the rear display, the Jacquard station pulsed with flickers of failing power, alarms visible even from orbit. She allowed herself a small smile. For all their arrogance, they had learned the hard way. Humans didn't break under pressure. They evolved. She sat back, staring into the stars, and whispered to herself. They tried interrogating a human. Big mistake.